So following up from the last video where we were talking about mesh density, we're now going to talk about a technique where you can model the base form using modeling, then subdivide, and then continue on the modeling process. For example, here's an exact issue that I ran into when I was doing the camera modeling. So here's the base form here, right? The base form here is on the left, and you can see that when I did the initial modeling, I did model in the holes for the screws and then the strap anchors here as well. Now, what you're going to see is the issue that we ran into in the last video where we were talking about mesh density. I am pulling, when I did this initial extrusion, you can see that I'm having to use the edges that are using or supporting the form to do this extrusion. And this is causing all sorts of issues. I kind of knew that I was going to come back and fix this, so it was a quick and dirty way just to punch this hole through and come back and fix it. Now, remember what we talked about with circular extrusions. In this example, I just ended up just using a quad, extruding it as kind of an example of, well, even with two subdivisions, you can still see obvious faceting here. So I put these in kind of as representative, and I knew that I was going to come back. Then when I came back and wanted to fix this, now let's look at the after, right? Because again, in the before, all sorts of surface artifacts were messing up the form of the curvature, and it's just not looking good. No matter what I tried to do this. I do want to add though, you can, there are ways to come in and modify the curvature, right? So for example, we can use, so if I turn off the viewport modifier or viewport viz, and let's say I'm like, okay, I want to add an edge here, add an edge here. And then for these edges, let's use set flow, right? So if I right click, go to set flow, and increase the angle. Like in this case, it actually works pretty well where it's kind of going across. And then this one, I can also, so I have just a quick favorites, I can do another set flow. Now, because I have this extra detail in here, I do need to increase the minimum angle just enough where it still gives me the curvature without destroying the geometry. So perfect, that actually works okay. However, let's see what impact this has on the rest of the model. The impact that it has now is that it no longer matches the original base mesh, right? And we have this issue, right? Compared to if you let the subdivision do the work, even with this is subdivided once, based off of this initial topology, look how well and look how perfectly those are lined up. So then I would have to go through and then just manually start fixing this. Where I was like, okay, well now things are a little bit off. I have to go in and start to move these edges, and it just becomes all sorts of a mess. So you don't want to do that in these types of cases. Sometimes you can, but as you can see, it causes more problems than what it's worth. So again, now let's jump back to the actual good version. So all this is just taking this model here, so Control D, and then just move it in the X, and subdividing it once. So I would actually remove all of the modifiers, subdivide it once, and then just apply. Of course, I'm always going to make sure that it is fully duplicated at this point. So just in case it's like, oh, well, let me go back and make some edits. It is destructive, but trust me, this will save you a lot of time down the road. So then once you're here, now look at all of this extra geometry. The curvature is completely preserved. And now even my screw holes, like if I turn on viewport visibility, look how good they look, right? They're nice in curvature, even at one subdivision, okay? Because now if I know that this is going to be two subdivisions, then let's say I bump this up to 2, then this has already been subdivided. So that means I leave it at 1. But I would say for this camera, for these high-res shots, I'd bump it up to 3 and then this up to 2. And then even at 2 subdivisions, you can see how well that geometry holds up. And because we are using 8 segments on this really small hole, you can't really even notice any faceting or the edges, right? So you have to zoom in super close. And this one, the anchor strap hole, like this is using, because it's a larger hole, it's using 12. And with this 12, even from this distance with 2 subdivisions, holds up incredibly well. Okay, so there are just way more pros than cons as to using this technique where you just model the form. Because a lot of people are like, oh man, how'd you get such clean looking topology and geometry? And I'm like, well, a lot of times I'll just let the subd do the work. I know what I'm doing, and I go through and I model the form with the intention of subdividing. And I kind of knew that I was going to have to do this here, but I was like, perfect example. This is an ideal situation that I've run to countless times where it's just like you don't get enough geometry. So we run into this now where we can do the extrusion. So just to kind of wrap up, now I can go in here and let's say I grab these faces just to kind of show how I did it. And I can take these and do an inset with I, okay? And then from here, I can do a loop tool circle, okay? Now I was messing with radius earlier, so set the radius, or disable the radius, I should say. And then we can see this is conforming to the surface, and then I can rotate the angle just until it's about even, just like this, and that looks good. And then I can extrude. That's looking nice. And then I can right click loop tools, flatten if I wanted to flatten this. So you can see how that flattens super nice. And to kind of keep our, actually let me inset. So if I inset this just like that, that's looking good. And then I can inset one more time and do a merge at center, boom, nice and clean. So with this, I'll set the bevel weight to 1 and then apply. So I do have to copy the modifier. So I select this first and this second, Control L, copy modifiers. Boom, yeah. So you want to select the last object as the modifiers you want to copy to the new object. So there, we have those all copied over so I don't have to manually do that all over again. And there you go. Look how good that looks. Nice and clean, super easy. And then if I happen to want to also do it like, maybe I'll just grab one of these because I don't want to do these for, I mean, I can do, actually I can like do them at the same time. So you do something like this and then right click, circle. And then from here it gets a little bit weird. Like I'd have to go in and manually rotate them separately, but again, not a big deal. We grab these faces, extrude in, continuing on, you know, with our inset, and then we can just select these edges with Shift Alt left click just to add to that loop selection. And then here we just add our bevel weight non-destructively, and then there you go. So you can see how beneficial this is. And if I just needed to go back and let's say, oh, let me make, you know, updates to this, I have this base mesh that I can go back to. And I would use this technique on anywhere else that I have intricate details. You can see for the top of the camera, I had plenty subdivisions, even for some of these smaller holes. So that worked out okay. If I had even smaller screws, that's where I would use it. But you get the idea, okay? So this workflow of modeling, subdivide, and then detailing is incredibly, incredibly useful. And I use it all the time, especially when subd modeling and anywhere that I'm just working on a high poly object. You can, of course, bake this down to low poly because everyone always says, oh, well, the density is too high. What about low poly? No problem. My low poly is going to be a separate mesh anyways that I'll bake down to a completely different mesh. So with that caveat out of the way, that should be everything that I want to cover. So I'll see you in the next video.